It's one of those strange conundrums. There's no, well, since Christmas at least, there's no more important day of the church year than Ash Wednesday. I obviously broke my fast of avoiding the liberality, socialism of the Episcopal Church today. I couldn't stay away on Ash Wednesday, but oh goodness, is it really appropriate to say happy Ash Wednesday? Happy have a nice Lent? Nah, that sounds kind of weird, doesn't it? But anyhow, here we are bemoaning our manifold sins and wickednesses of allowing Joe Biden to be president, day 24 hours after the State of the Union address. You know, if Joe Biden hasn't been excommunicated from the Catholic Church, it just shows that the Roman Catholic Church has no integrity whatsoever. And under Pope Francis, I think that's a fair statement to make. It probably doesn't have any integrity left. But anyhow, I have done a lot of thinking about the State of the Union address, and here to join me is Seed Sue. Seed Sue, how are you? I'm sorry I'm saying that I can't help myself.
You've got a dot on your forehead.
Yes, I converted to Hinduism because the Episcopal Church is too damn liberal. I'm now a Hindu nationalist.
Okay. Oh, good.
No, I think I mentioned the other night, this is actually the first time I've been to church in 2022, because right after Christmas, after a St. Stephen's Day in which they didn't mention St. Stephen's or the 12 days of Christmas, I just sort of wrote off my church altogether. But I don't know. Here's the truth. Here's the truth. I confess to you. I don't really go to church because I'm anymore in tune with the version of Christianity that they have. It's a form of ancestor worship for me. I go because my parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, the fact that my father was a member of the Society of King Charles the Martyr, and so was his father. I mean, I feel like I'm keeping company with my family, even though there's nobody left except me, basically.
Yeah, I know. I have the same sentiments. My Johnson ancestors came over with the Puritans, and then they were very much like the Puritans and very strict and stern. And then in the 1830s, Mormonism started, and they were equally stern, only a little bit different. So then they joined them, and we've been ever since. 6 generations Mormon, and then before that, 6 generations Puritan in the United States. So yeah, I have those same sentiments.
But anyhow, I just got back. As a matter of fact, some people go very early in the morning, but I'm just not a morning person.
Do you have church on Wednesdays for Ash Wednesday?
Well, yeah. It just ended. Actually, I rushed back. I didn't even join in the quote unquote simple repast that they were serving, so that I could come here and talk to you. It looks like we're going to be alone. We don't have anybody joining us, but Paul had said he was going to, but I haven't been able to reach him all day.
Okay.
But anyhow, I thought that
Are we recording now?
We are.
Oh, okay. All right.
We are. I thought the State of the Union address was the greatest justification for January 6th of last year that we possibly could have had.
Yeah. Leading up to that, I want to talk about the trucker to DC protest that didn't happen. Because the last time you and me and Paul were talking about this issue, I
Right.
had thought that, well, there's going to be a lot of truckers coming to Washington, D.C., and there's going to be a lot of arrests, and it's going to be very dangerous for these truckers. So be very careful. And then I noticed that it petered out. A couple of convoys dropped out ahead of time. And then I read just now that the actual protest they were outnumbered greatly by protesters and the press. I read somewhere that the rally consisted of 12 people, and I'm not sure whether that was correct or not, but it just shows that America doesn't have what Canada has with regard to protests. And so I was disappointed that there was not more protest.
That's amazing. I confess I had forgotten all about it. I've been frightfully busy, and then listening to Biden, I just
Yeah. But see, that the protest was supposed to take place right during the Biden State of the Union speech. And since that didn't happen, it was the State of the Union speech was a little bit less disappointing, and I was just a little bit less thrilled than I could have been.
the only good news about that is and I mean, it really lightens my spirits in a way, because if there are only 12 people showing up at this proposal, at this protest, then that means that the Unite the Right 2 that I was a member of 4 years ago is not the smallest and greatest failure that ever took place, because we had about 20 people there, maybe 22. So
weren't you the only speaker?
Yeah.
Well, okay. So
it's not it's not the catastrophic. It's not the biggest catastrophic failure ever anymore. The truckers beat us. Okay.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
You always look on the bright side of life.
Yeah.
But anyhow, I had a bunch of interesting discussions in the aftermath of the State of the Union address. And a couple of nights ago, you mentioned that you were close friends with Chris Donnellan.
Yes.
And I didn't get a chance to tell you at that point that he and I have never actually met, but we've been corresponding and friends in cyberspace for, God, going on like 15 years now. And he and I corresponded after the State of the Union address, and we had a very interesting interaction, which highlights, well, it's an argument that he and I have been having for ages, but it highlights, I think, one of the problems in the white nationalist movement, frankly, and I'd like to discuss that with you.
Before we do that, when you talk to Chris Donnellan, have him give me a call. I want to talk to him.
Okay, well, I actually invited him to join us on one of these podcasts, so hopefully that'll happen. But I'll tell him. He remembers you very fondly, and anyhow.
Okay, what's your question?
Is white nationalism capitalist or socialist? Because I consider myself a capitalist. And Chris considers the movement to be socialist. And I just want to read you from some of the exchange we had, because I thought it was pretty amazingly interesting. And hang on, did it all get erased or something? What happened? I thought it was right on here. I don't see it now. Okay, I'll summarize it. But what it was about me saying that one of the stupidest things, and it's a tough competition, but one of the stupidest things in Biden's oh no, it's on this phone. Okay. One of the stupidest things in Biden's presentation was he wants to raise the minimum wage to $15, but then he wants to bring industry back to the United States. And I was telling Chris that I thought that's just insane. And he says, well, you lost me on the minimum wage. I am for white workers making a living wage. Both parties alike are responsible for the current state of affairs. As degenerate and anti-white as Democrats are, it isn't like the GOP is any better from a pro-white standpoint. The corporations and business interests who historically funded the GOP in California and Texas just loved all that cheap labor from south of the border that business interests could exploit and pay lower wages, displacing white American workers in the process. And then there was the Gipper with his amnesty bill, AKA Simpson-Mazzoli. I am a fan of Huey P. Long and Father Coughlin, not so fond of Milton Friedman and Ayn Rand. Of course, I'm no fan of Milton Friedman and Ayn Rand either, and I have very close family ties to the governorship of Huey Long. But anyhow, here's what I responded. We are in basic, nearly complete agreement, except as to causation. It is the new wage and price controls that made the US labor market subject to foreign competition and infiltration. First, we raise the minimum wage. Then we finance higher wages by inflationary spending and monetary policies. Then we get American workers hooked on higher benefits. Then corporations discover two things. First, they can manufacture abroad and import cheaper than they can pay to produce here. Then the government basically makes it a crime to fire lazy, I shouldn't use the word I used in this, lazy African Americans. Then the government doubles the labor force by adding women, but they get the same pay, and women have special rights too. Voila! It is impossible to do business in America. But corporations discover that for dirty work that cannot be done offshore, Mexicans will work cheaper than people with white, black, or female privilege. And I continue from there, but I'd like to get your reaction. Who's right, if anybody?
Well, for years and years, I was a capitalist and I supported capitalism. And partially Chris Donlin kind of countered with me and put me in a little bit different direction. I kind of lean towards opposition to capitalism now, because I think that capitalism is partially responsible for the destruction of the white race and the displacement, what's it called, the Great Reset, the Great Reset. Because like you say, we're able to, the capitalists of industry are able to have product produced overseas by non-whites and take away our jobs. And I do blame the Rust Belt on large part the federal government, but also I think on the capriciousness and the avarice of capitalism. There is a concept that's neither socialist nor capitalist, and it's called distributism. And that kind of embraces closer, I think, to a socialist prototype than a capitalist prototype, because it thinks that the economic, what is it called, production of wealth and the means of production should be distributed among the populace. So instead of there being a few large owners of the means of production, it should kind of be spread out among a lot of people. And there is a movement now which says, buy locally, grow locally, buy locally. So when you go to the farmers markets in a lot of these towns, they're saying, we're local farmers, we produce our own little things, and you buy there. And you take that concept on a broader scale. I do believe that we should take care of our own to a certain extent, but we don't want to do away with the incentives of capitalism that if you work harder, you get more money. So I like that aspect of it. And I dislike the aspect of socialism where you have this safety net that if people don't want to work, they don't have to. And so in that sense, I think that distributism and socialism that is geared to help your own people would be appropriate. But then that is what's called National Socialism, and that's received a very bad rap over the last 50 or 60 years. I don't begrudge there being, I guess, what was it called? Insurance to cover all people, a one pay insurance for everybody. So you have a national insurance coverage if it's for our own people. And if there's a lot of what is it called? Checks and balances in place to keep people from getting what they don't really deserve or need. So I guess in a sense, I like the competitiveness of capitalism that makes people being productive, but I also like the concept of helping our own people out.
All right. I mean, I don't get the difference really between, I've heard this distributism before, but how would you distinguish between distributism and socialism? What's the difference?
Well, I think it's capitalism on a small scale. And so you don't have these captains of industry that really are out to look for their profits as the going commodity, as the primary focus of their efforts. I think that corporations have three functions. One, to provide good products or services to the people. Two, to provide good living wages for the employees. And then three, to make a profit for the owners of the corporation. And I think under capitalism, the emphasis has been on making profits for the shareholders. And I think that should be the least important of the three. I think providing a living wage and providing good product should be the more important component. And I think that we don't need to have China be the manufacturer of the world. I don't think we need to have to go overseas to do all of our manufacturing. I think we can be self-sufficient. I mean, if you take a look at South Africa as a prototype, it was completely self-sufficient by necessity because it had apartheid as its policy. And so the entire world, led by America, they banned and intercourse with South Africa, and it created, they had to do everything themselves. So they did everything locally and they made it work, and it was a beautiful system. We can have in America complete self-sufficiency, and we can have a good high standard of living. Now, one of the downsides, people say it as capitalists, is that, well, it's good for the consumers because the prices are kept really low and you can buy a lot of things cheaply. Well, we don't need any more junk filling up our property, our garages and our homes, and putting all the plastic into the oceans and the seas. So I think that doing away with consumerism is a good thing. And doing away with consumerism means that you gut certain aspects of capitalism.
I mean, gutting consumerism, that's a fascinating thought, because that's not an economic reform so much as that's psychotherapy.
Well, if you made toothpaste $10 a tube, which I just read is coming under the Biden administration, people are going to find an alternative. You're going to find people learning how to make tooth powder again, And
no, under the Biden administration, what's going to happen is they will raise the minimum wage and extend credits extravagantly, and this will lead to catastrophic inflation. And so $10 I mean, I just hate the fact that I am now old enough to be saying, I remember when, gas was only $1. That's when I started driving. Actually, it was when gas was only $1. But I actually remember when gas was 25 cents.
I brag about that. I tell my kids, it says, I used to pay 25 cents a gallon for my gas. That was when I turned 16. That was what it was. So yeah,
I am.
yeah. Well, also I didn't live in California at that time too. But yeah, in any event, I think that the system is broke in many different respects.
Hang on.
And
Paul is calling. Let me answer so I know
okay.
what's going on with him. Paul, we're on. You want to join us?
No, I'm still traveling. I'm not home yet, so I'll see you Friday.
All right. Okay. Well, we miss you. We were thinking about you. Talk to you later. He said he's on the road.
Yeah. Okay.
So anyhow, let's see.
The point that I want to make:
the price of gas and the price of everything. Inflation and government benefits and credit spending all go together. And this is my point. I mean, no, I think that you're wrong. $10 toothpaste or even $25 toothpaste, it will just lead to demand for extremely easy credit and higher wages and more stimulus checks. And it's, will we end up in Weimar America in a couple of weeks? I mean, it's possible. That's where Biden seems to have been leading us, but actually it wasn't Biden who started the stimulus checks, was it?
Yeah, you cannot have a socialist system in a multicultural society like in America. And so I agree with you in that sense that socialism is absolutely doomed for failure in the American prototype as it exists in 2021. And I saw recently an article when it came out. I didn't read the original article, but I read the reaction to the article. I think it was CNN that says, inflation is a good thing. And they started trying to justify inflation. And then the backlash was huge. And so CNN retracted that. And so you have a lot of Biden apologists are trying to seek solutions or explanations for the current difficulty that we have. But yeah, I agree with you there. I think that we are heading towards a Weimar America, and maybe there needs to be a great reset.
Well, a great reset is happening, but it's happening with the wrong leaders.
And the wrong direction, yeah.
Yeah, yes. I mean, that's Carl Schwab, his phrase. And I mean, let's think though about something else you said that I think is very interesting. You were talking about the purpose of corporations.
Uh-huh.
And your ancestors that you were talking about a few minutes ago converted from Puritanism to Mormonism 6 generations ago.
Yeah.
How many big corporations were there in America?
Very few. And see, if you go back to my ancestors, my parents were cotton farmers for way back, several generations. And then when they were not cotton farmers, they were just farmers, whatever it was. And when they were in Connecticut, they were just regular farmers, but they've always been farmers. And at that time, most of the nation was farmers because shoes were manufactured by a cobbler. And you could only make, 3 pairs a day or something like that. Now you press a button and you get 500,000 pairs of Nike shoes, in a day and a half. So we no longer need to have so many people being farmers. But the downside of this technology that we have is we produce way more than we need. We consume way more than we need to, and it's really bad on the environment. How many pairs of shoes do you have? I got way more pair of shoes than I need. I remember when Captain John Johnson, I don't remember when he died, but I remember reading his will, and he died. He was the first one to come over, and he came over in 1635 and settled in Roxbury, Massachusetts. And when he died in the late 1600s, I read his will, and he gave his pair of leather pants to his son. So can you imagine having in a will where you give your pair of pants away? That just shows how.
I've never seen that in a will. Yes, that's pretty interesting.
So it's really, we have to have a logical defense mechanism to this runaway society that we have. And it's not just runaway craziness of the Biden administration, runaway craziness of the great replacement and the immigrants coming to this country, but also we have to have an adequate defense to the runaway problems of capitalism. And I'm not saying that capitalism needs to be done away with. I think there's aspects of capitalism that are great, but it needs to be addressed in a way that can handle the problems of today. And capitalism existed when Captain John Johnson gave his jeans, his leather pants to his son, and it still exists today, but we can't have the same mechanisms in place.
Those leather pants still exist today?
Well, I don't know. I don't have them, but I wasn't the oldest son of the oldest son of the oldest son, so I don't know.
Hang on. Are you in order of Cincinnati?
No, I don't know what that is.
You said you're an eldest son of an eldest son of an eldest
Oh
son.
no, I said I am not the eldest son of the eldest
Oh,
son.
you're not. You're not. Okay.
Yeah, is that what the Order of Cincinnati is?
Yeah, if your ancestors were in the American Revolution, you can join something called the Order. You're automatically a member if you just have to activate it. If you're by primogeniture direct descendant of an officer in the American Revolution.
Oh, that's interesting. See, my ancestor, Captain John Johnson, the son of, Captain Isaac Johnson, the son of Captain John Johnson, was the first captain killed in the first battle in the Americas between whites and others. It was called the Great Swamp Fight. And you have my ancestor's picture, woodblock carving in the 4th floor of Faneuil Hall, which were the ancient and honorable artillery of Massachusetts, which is the 4th oldest or the 3rd oldest military organization in the world. You've got the oldest one is the Swiss Guards who guard the Pope. Then you have the ancient and honorable artillery of London. And then you have the one in Massachusetts, of which Calvin Coolidge and JFK and others were members. And if you go into that 4th floor, you've got my ancestor, Captain Isaac Johnson, getting shot and killed by the Indians. He was in the first one that's involved in that war. But after that time, we check it, and I don't really know that any of my Johnson line was in the Revolutionary War. I don't know any of that. They might have been hiding under a barrel. I don't know.
Well, this is a side point. Do you pronounce it Faneuil Hall or Faneuil Hall? I've always pronounced it Faneuil Hall.
Yeah, that's right. I don't know. I'm not from Massachusetts, so I don't know.
You went to Harvard. You must have hung out at Faneuil Hall and gone to Durgan Park occasionally.
Yeah. When I was actually at Harvard, I wanted to go take a look at my ancestors' burial grounds in Roxbury, Massachusetts. So I got into a cab and I said I wanted to go to Roxbury, Massachusetts. I wanted to go to the cemetery there. And the driver, I don't know where he was from, but he wasn't from America. He says, "I'm not going there." And I said, "Why not?" He said, "That's the most dangerous place in all of Massachusetts." So I can tell you it wasn't dangerous back in the 1630s.
Your ancestor got killed by the Indians. It was very dangerous.
But even though there are Indians there, it wasn't as dangerous. Yeah, he got killed. But if you go to Roxbury now, every day you get people killed. So whatever. That's an aside.
That is a very interesting aside, though. I mean, that's fabulous. Anyhow, let's think about corporations and the relationship between corporations and capitalism. Are corporations really capitalistic? I mean, was America capitalistic when the Mormons started out?
Well, I think that there was free market capitalism because there were not restrictions on that. You could do a lot more then than you could today. So it was a lot freer back then than it is now. But it was before the Industrial Revolution, so you didn't have industry. So sure, you had capitalism. You could grow.
The Industrial Revolution started in the late 18th century, and it hit America. I mean, the way it hit America is kind of interesting. It hit America through New England fishermen, New England whalers. It hit America with New England mills that were typically family owned, not corporate owned. It hit the Industrial Revolution was part of the reason for the success, the triumph, really, ultimately tragic, of slavery in the southern United States, because the southern solution to in the Industrial Revolution was the mass agricultural production. And what's interesting, and I think what so few people have studied, and this is sort of due to my background in anthropology and history that I think this way, but in 1848, February of 1848 to be precise, a German Jew living in London published a little pamphlet which proposed the creation of industrial armies, which would be subsidized by the government. And that intriguingly, this German Jew living in London, had a great influence on the philosophy of a distant cousin of mine who became the 16th president. And in his war against the American South, he transformed the United States by government spending into a land of gigantic corporations, which after he died just got bigger and bigger and bigger, not because of capitalism or free competition, but because of government charters and government spending. That is, I mean, the Lincoln administration, the very first thing they created were bigger and better railroads. But in order to create bigger and better railroads, you had to create bigger and better steel companies. And to keep steel companies and railroads going, you had to create bigger and better coal mining operations, soon to be replaced by bigger and better oil drilling operations. And then all of a sudden you have the 20th century.
Okay. Well, thanks for the education. I think you're right. I think we need to take a step back and say that the Industrial Revolution did not hit my Johnson line until the 1960s, because my grandfather, who was a cotton farmer, he farmed his entire life with horses, and so
he didn't have any sharecroppers or
my mother's side, the Simmons line, he was the largest cotton farmer in the state of Arizona. But my father's side, the Johnson side, he just farmed 40 acres at a time, 40 acres and 40 acres alternative. But my uncle said that he farmed with horses his entire career, and he quit farming in the 1960s. So for the Johnson side, the Industrial Revolution didn't hit until my grandfather quit farming with horses.
You've got a lot of interesting family history there.
What you said is a very good analysis, and I hope a lot of people hear that, because it's important. What you said, I think, is exactly right. And so we need to deal with this big monolith called capitalism with today's issues, not with Lincoln's era issues, and not with Captain John Johnson's era's issues.
Well, and we need to understand that the capitalism, that what we call capitalism, up to a point, is the product of that German Jew living in London in 1848. It is part of the corporate world, is part of the communist revolution.
I thought he lived way after that. You said he wrote that in 1848, or is that the year he was born?
That's the year of the communist. That's the publication of the Communist Manifesto.
Wow, if you'd asked me when that was, I'd have said, oh, 1910. So it shows I was off by 50 years. Okay. Well, that's
Yeah, I mean, the communist. I mean, in 1856, you get Gegen Feuerbach, and then in 1858 you get Das Kapital, and Das Kapital is really the transformative moment, even more than, well, I mean, everything that Marx did is basically transformative, but what he transformed more than anything else was English and American capitalism. That's what people don't realize, that by the time that Edward VII inherited the throne from his mother Victoria, can you quote one of his most famous statements?
Gee, you've got a great figure there, little girl. I don't know. What was it?
We are all socialists now.
Oh, really? Is that was Edward VII?
Edward VII said we are all socialists now. And that's mind-boggling. The King of England sitting on the throne, the Emperor of India, is saying we are all socialists now. And if you look at what's going on in England, Austria-Hungary, which managed to destroy the entire world, with getting us into World War I, they had incredibly Biden-esque socialism, and I mean, part of the proof of just how progressive they were. Do you happen to know what Gavrilo Princip's sentence was for murdering the Archduke Ferdinand?
Was it similar to what blacks get today when they murder somebody? A light sentence? Yeah.
I believe it was 20 years.
Yeah.
He died in prison, but nonetheless, I mean, it's just incredible to think about that the emperor of the heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire was not immediately shot, hanged, drawn, and quartered in that order.
Well, the person who killed, I think he was an American Indian or partially that, the person who killed George Lincoln Rockwell wasn't even put in, he was given another name and was released on a witness protection program, so we got a lot of murderers that are getting free because they're killing the right people.
Well, I mean, I was going to say, wasn't he basically a government agent?
Could it be? I don't know. But okay, my question is to you is, what is the solution economically to the problems we're facing today? How do we solve our problems through economics? What system do we need to have?
Well, I think that honestly, we need to go back to something like the pre-Lincoln economy to the degree it's possible. Example, how do we stop non-white immigration in this country? Right now, it's probably impossible to get everybody to agree to stop non-whites. That's not politically viable. But would it be politically viable to say, we can't afford all of these benefits that we're giving people, so since we can't discriminate, we are going to stop them altogether. And then no one will come. We will actually end up with net emigration. People will be fleeing the United States, especially the non-whites who have nothing, basically no stake in the system other than the welfare system.
I think that we have two systems here, two solutions here that I want to bring up. One is the solution that you have in the border between North Korea and South Korea. What would happen if someone from North Korea tried to go to South Korea?
They welcome.
they would be stopped. No, if they tried to go from North Korea to South Korea, they would step on a landmine or they'd be shot to death. So
But
that's
if they'd be welcome.
yeah, that's one approach, and that is distasteful. A less distasteful approach would be, like you say, do away with Section 8 housing, do away with free medical care, do away with all sorts of food stamps, EBT, do away with free education, do away with all that stuff. And which do you think is more palatable? I think your solution more than the North Korea solution. And which would have a greater impact? Your solution, not the other one. So I totally agree with you. And if you have runaway inflation will help solve the problem. Because if people cannot afford to buy food, when you go in and you see the price of food just skyrocketing, everybody in line is paying with a credit card that's an EBT, electronic food stamp card. They don't care. They buy just all sorts of food. They want expensive food because they can pay for it with the EBT card. And that's why if you look at the TV, you see all the advertisements are all of non-white people. Why? Because they don't have to watch their money. They don't care. They get free money from the government. They go and buy everything that they want to buy because they don't have to earn it. So if you do what your solution is, people will eventually leave the country because they won't be able to survive. And they might end up robbing more, but we got a lot of robbers now. So I think that I would prefer your solution to the North Korean solution, and I think it'd be much more effective.
And how do, I mean, in other words, though, that's got to be, this is part of the argument with Chris Donilon, though. I mean,
no, because Chris Donilon takes it from a national socialist perspective. He wouldn't provide services to those people either.
But if you're still providing them to Americans, it's there's going to go, we're going to end up in this endless loop system of, okay, well, we're gonna give it to white people and mixed people. We're gonna give it to Black people because they've been here forever, right? They've been here since 1619. And we basically, if you have a system in place, it's going to be shared. But you know, there was this amazing, and I've tried to raise this a couple of times, and we haven't gotten far enough with it. But you know, the one sense in which distributism might be kind of interesting is if we approached the problem of corporatism by the law and say we abolished immunity for corporate owners. In other words, that the corporate, what they call the corporate veil, could no longer protect owners and directors. In other words, that is, you see, that was the big difference in the early 19th century when your ancestors became Mormons, because there were no corporations to speak of. All businesses were liable for their debts through their owners.
Yeah. I basically disagree with that premise because as a lawyer here in California, I see all sorts of rapacious abuse by lawyers going after corporations just to get the ghetto lottery. And
But why does that work? It works because of insurance and banking, and because of the credit that insurance and banking create.
Yeah.
You know, in other words, corporations need credit. They abuse their credit just like everybody else does. And I mean, if it weren't for insurance and reinsurance, you know, that culture of personal injury law could not exist.
Right, but it's not just personal injury law. It's also I'm seeing a lot of labor law issues where employees are suing their employers to try to get a free gives. But I want to take a step
Like under
back.
the civil rights laws, for instance?
Pardon me?
Like under the civil rights laws, for instance?
Oh, that, and just, there's so many labor laws in California that if you make one little misstep, the legal fees are just astronomical, because they can take it all the way to trial, and you have to pay their fees. But I want to take a step back. You had you were talking about someone who wrote something in 1848. Well, someone who died in 1950, I guess his name was George Bernard Shaw. He was like 95-year-old when he did that. And I saw a video on the on there where he's saying, you're going to have to justify your existence. All these people that were homeless, if you meet before the board and you can't justify your existence, we're going to have to get rid of you. We're going to do it with you. It won't be torture, but it's going to be death. If you can't. And so he was saying, but let me just continue on. He was saying, we got to kill these people if they're not producing. That was an extreme statement. But what I wanted to say right there is I want to leave that aside. And he wrote a play called Pygmalion. And in Pygmalion, what you have, Rex, what's his name? Harrison, only, yeah, whatever it was, whoever played it in the non-musical version. He was, I guess not Rex Harrison, it was the guy that played Eliza Doolittle's father. He says, it's hard on me because I'm not the deserving poor. We only want to help the deserving poor, and I'm not the deserving poor. And so to take a step back, socialism, as envisioned by Chris Donnellan, would only help the deserving poor. It wouldn't help the undeserving poor. So the people that are poor because they're stretched out on drugs, they would be dealt with not as George Bernard Shaw dealt with them in Pygmalion. They'd be dealt with in the way George Bernard Shaw did in his video about what you do if you're non-productive. So I think that there can be socialist systems in place that help the deserving poor and discourage people from being non-deserving. And I'm just talking off the top of my head, so maybe it's a little bit too extreme to take George Bernard Shaw's approach. But I think that you can have a safety net that helps. Now, like I think that FDR, when he started to put in a safety net, he didn't realize the total destruction that would occur. He was thinking more on the lines of, let's help the Dust Bowl people who don't have any money, and they're being displaced because of the Dust Bowl, the Okies, and let's help them out. And it's more from that to be something much more serious. And also back then, the safety net and the deserving poor was much more needed now, because you indeed had widows, because husbands would die. Now our medical care is so good, generally people don't die, so you don't have the orphans. You don't have orphans. You have abandoned children, and children who are abandoned, or children who are not raised, who are not wanted by their parents. Their genes are not anywhere near as good as previously were orphans, who they had good mothers and good fathers, but they died because of tuberculosis, or they died because of accidents that took place when they were working in Carnegie steel mills that were making America great, but were oppressing the workers.
Well, it's very interesting because, of course, the very concept of deserving and undeserving is possibly even more politically incorrect these days than our racism. Racism is a form of evaluating worth, but if you talk about, this goes back to the Biden State of the Onion address, and Biden, as he was getting towards the end, of his incoherent babble, he was talking about LGBTQ rights, and of course the great threat to women by the possible repeal of Roe v. Wade. Uh, he he's basically talking about the need to protect and secure immorality at the highest level. I mean, when Roosevelt, I'll give you this: when Roosevelt was talking about the safety net in the 30s, this was a Christian country, and the very tiny non-Christian minority felt compelled to conform to Christian values. We lived in a homogeneous society where ethics and morality were in everybody's mind and heart.
I agree with that. And I think really the only people during that era who were not following the Christian morals and principles were FDR and his cronies. So they were promoting that stuff while on the side he was in a wheelchair doing things that he shouldn't be doing with anyone other than his cousin. But leaving that aside, I think that the country is broken and we need to look to new solutions, and I'm open to a lot of things. You said something to me during one of the previous broadcasts that I think was influential to what I said. I was saying we got to have eugenics, and you said, well, if you have eugenics, if the government does it, it's going to be dangerous. And I said, well, I'll put it in place. And so I think that I have a lot of ideals that aren't real practical, because I think, well, let's give them to the deserving poor. And that's got the same problem that you pointed out. Well, if the government is going to decide who's deserving and who's not deserving, you're going to have the same mess with regard to eugenics. So we have to have the right person decide on eugenics and the right person decide on who's the deserving poor. And no one's going to be happy. There's going to be both sides going to have a lot of disagreement on that. So it's probably better in theory in my own mind than in practice in reality.
This goes back to the very first thing I'm talking about why I haven't been to church in this entire year. And I Lent leading up to Easter, this is the most important time of the church year. I go to honor my parents and grandparents, but the church itself is not a source of the kind of morality that we're talking about. It's actually desperately pushing immorality. It's promoting degeneracy. It's protecting everything in the Biden, Kamala Harris agenda. It despises criticism. It despises. It judges judgmental people. How's that for? If you say that Kamala Harris is a slut, which is just like beyond one of these statements that's beyond reasonable doubt by any standards, if you say that, you're a horrible person, because you're violating her right to be whatever she wants to be.
Yeah, and it used to be if someone was a discriminating person, that was a compliment. And now if you discriminate, boy, that's really bad up there. And I remember listening to Paul Harvey when I was a kid, because my dad used to always listen, and he was saying, it's so, today's youth, they don't want to be square. Well, when I was great, to be square was a positive thing. And so we got to get back to where being square is a good thing. And nowadays they don't even use, oh, he's a square. The young kids probably don't even know what that definition means, but they sure know that if I say, well, I'm discriminating, I'm a discriminating person, they will put horns on my head and chase me out of town for being evil. So yeah, we gotta deal with the situation.
It's interesting. Strom Thurmond, one of my lifelong heroes in some ways.
I'm glad you said in some ways. Okay.
I mean, not in he did some. Well, never mind.
Yeah, I know.
In some ways, in some ways, but I mean, when he founded the Dixiecrat Party in 1948, when he walked out of the Democratic National Convention, his platform actually said exactly what you said. Discrimination is the foundation of civilization.
Yeah.
Wow, what a statement. You got to know what's good and what's bad, what's right and what's wrong. That's the original meaning of discrimination.
Yeah, yeah. And we
You
sure
got to
have
know.
lost.
You got to know what's white and what's black.
Yeah. And now discrimination is one of the worst words in the English language. So.
And at the same time, even institutions like the Episcopal Church have basically abandoned civilization.
Yeah.
I mean, the statement is still true that that discrimination is the foundation of civilization, and so we've abandoned civilization. If you think about it, the whole 20th century was about walking away from civilization. Sigmund Freud's famous book, Civilization and Its Discontents.
Mm-hmm.
Morality makes people unhappy.
I just need to go outside of my building, which is in a high rise in the most important financial district in Los Angeles, which is one of the most important financial districts in the nation. I just need to go outside and look on one side of the street and the other side of the street, look on both sidewalks, and I can see that we've abandoned civilization because there's homeless people everywhere, and we have abandoned civilization. So yeah, so we need to reestablish it. And hopefully we can do that. So thanks a lot.
It's a challenge. It's definitely a challenge. I mean, in all fairness, there were homeless people in London in the 18th century and in London in the 17th century too. I mean, I don't know if you've read the poetry of William Blake, but there was a lot of misery in pre-industrial and early industrial England and America. And so, I mean, the homeless people are, Jesus said, I am here but for a day, the poor are with us always.
Yeah.
And
if you remember reading old children's stories from England, who lived under the bridges? Trolls. And where does that come from? They were homeless people. So you're right. They had trolls back then under the bridges, just like we have them nowadays. And back then, the situation is that because health care was so bad, 40% of the population didn't live to be adults. Now they all live to be adults and they live a long time. So we got to make some corrections to. We have to have the social solutions keep up with medical advancements, and we haven't done that. We make people live longer and they survive and they are able to have a lot of children and they get food on the table, and so they reproduce more and more and more, and socially it's destructive. And so we have to have a social system that has the same advancement as our medical system. Okay, in any way, that
you're getting tired.
I'm getting tired, and our audience is getting bored. So
I don't think they are. I think we've got all sorts of exciting things today, and what we can pick up at some point. Maybe not Friday, or maybe Friday. You just mentioned the relationship between population growth due to medical benefits and population control due to social policy. And I mean, that is a fascinating thing from my experiences in Latin America, because and I'll just mention one of my heroes is President Luis Alvarez Echeverria of Mexico. He was as white as you are. He was president of Mexico in the 1970s. And among many heroic things he did was he said that Zionism is the most pernicious form of racism in the entire world. And then he also, he was the beneficiary of the Arab oil embargo that quadrupled the price of oil. And he invested all of that money that Mexico got from the increased price of oil in developing rural electrification and rural medical clinics.
So he was the Huey Long of Mexico then.
Exactly. Exactly.
What was his name? What was his name?
Luis Alvarez Echeverria.
Okay.
Echeverria, 1970 to 1976. But here's what else he did that was so responsible. He promoted birth control. And he said that you cannot have a healthy society that is growing uncontrollably. And here is one of the great perversions. He left office in 76. John Paul II became Pope in either 78 or 79. He became the first Pope ever to come to Mexico. And he told the people of Mexico to throw away their birth control. And so he, in one fell swoop, he abolished all the good that Echeverria had done. And this is one of the challenges. All our churches are working against us. And you see, that's why there's this huge influx of Mexican population into the United States, is because the Mexican population boomed. And we can drop it, we can stop the dialogue there, but it was one of the most evil things I have ever seen, that the wealth of Mexico's oil was originally used wisely, but because of the influence of basically the anti-white Roman Catholic Church, they destroyed Mexico and turned it into the nightmare that it and its influence in the United States has become.
All right. Thank you very much.
Okay, Bill, thank you very much. We'll see you Friday.
All right.
Well, happy Ash Wednesday. I don't know if it's an appropriate thing to say happy day of mourning, but okay.
All right. Very good. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And good night, everybody. A blessed Ash Wednesday and a blessed Lent to all who believe in the original faith, all who believe that white Christian European